They hated each other, sabotaged each other, and dragged each other, literally and figuratively, across movie sets. At least, that's the story Hollywood sold us. The feud between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford has been called the most savage in showbiz. But dig a little deeper and you'll find something even juicier than scandal. The truth. Today, we're cutting through the gossip, studio spin, and tabloid theatrics to find out what really happened between these two Hollywood icons and who was actually pulling the strings. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford were Hollywood royalty, but they were cut from very different cloth. Bette came from the East Coast theater scene and was all about the work. She didn't care much for glamour or playing nice. Joan, on the other hand, was a studio-made star, polished to perfection. She played the part of the glamorous leading lady on and off screen, and she worked obsessively to protect that image. In 1933, Bette hit what should have been a milestone. Her name was featured above the title for the first time in Ex-Lady. Warner Brothers had big plans to hype Bette up as the studio's next dramatic powerhouse, but Joan had other ideas. The same day, Crawford announced her divorce from Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and the press naturally lost their minds. The New York Times shoved Davis's big moment into a tiny review blurb, while giving Joan's divorce several full pages. And soon, every other paper followed the scandal, pushing Davis's film out of the spotlight entirely. Bette's breakout film flopped and was pulled from theaters within a week. And just like that, the resentment was born. Davis never forgot how Joan's drama stole her spotlight. Then came Showdown, the nail in the coffin. In 1935, Davis starred in Dangerous and quickly fell for her co-star. She said in an interview later, "I fell in love with Show professionally and privately. But while Bette was falling, Joan was plotting. She invited Tone over for lunch and allegedly greeted him nude by the pool. And before filming even wrapped on the film Bette and Franchot were working on, they were engaged. He was madly in love with her," Bette admitted, "and I was jealous, of course." Crawford, never one to miss a jab, once said Franchot thought Bette was a good actress, but he never thought of her as a woman. Brutal. By the 1940s, both women were under contract at Warner Brothers, with dressing rooms right next to each other. Joan, apparently trying to play nice, sent Bette flowers and gifts. Bette sent them all back, suggesting the gestures were, quote, lesbian overtures. So yeah, things were frosty. The rivalry grew as they battled for roles. Bette was the studio's first choice for Mildred Pierce, but she passed. Joan campaigned hard, landed the role, and ended up winning her first and only Oscar for it, while laying in bed, no less, claiming illness. A couple years later, Crawford snugged another Davis pick, Possessed, and got an Oscar nomination for that one too. Hollywood was a competitive circus, and it loved nothing more than watching two powerful women go head-to-head. The industry thrived on it. Crawford always stayed mostly polite in public, rarely saying much about Bette, but Davis, she never held back. Whether it was claiming Joan slept with, quote, every male star at MGM except Lassie, or calling her a mannequin, Bette made sure the world knew exactly how she felt. There was no question the feud was real, but it wasn't just personal. It was professional, fueled by the studios, the media, and a town that loved a good catfight, especially when it involved two of its most bankable women. And this was just the beginning. By the early 1960s, both Bette Davis and Joan Crawford were navigating the challenges of aging in Hollywood. Davis, the ever-serious actress, was seeking a role that would reignite her career. Bette was hustling for work, literally. In one of the boldest moves of her career, she took out a personal ad in Variety that read, "Mother of 3, divorcee, 30 years experience as an actress in motion pictures, mobile still, and more affable than rumor would have it." Crawford, always the savvy strategist, saw an opportunity in a novel called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And she knew exactly how to make it buzz. She reached out to Davis personally, a bold move considering their long-standing tension. But Joan was no fool. She probably knew the idea of these two fighting legends sharing the screen again would practically sell itself. Crawford, recognizing the potential of the story, approached director Robert Aldrich with the idea of adapting the novel into a film, envisioning herself and Davis in the lead roles. She then reached out to Davis, proposing they starred together. Davis, intrigued, met with Aldrich and had two pressing questions. Would she be playing the role of Jane, and was Aldrich romantically involved with Crawford? Satisfied with the answers, Davis agreed to the project. Initially, filming proceeded smoothly. Both actresses were professional and maintained a cordial public front. However, tensions soon escalated. Davis reportedly referred to Crawford as that phony cunt within Joan's presence, and both actresses would call Aldrich nightly to complain about one another. The on-set drama peaked during the scene where Jane beats Blanche. Crawford, concerned for her safety, requested a body double. However, for a close-up, a double couldn't be used. During filming, Davis struck Crawford's head, leading to a halt in production. Davis claimed, "I barely touched her," but some accounts suggest Crawford required stitches. Crawford got her revenge during a scene where Jane drags Blanche across the floor. Knowing Davis had back problems, Crawford made herself as heavy as possible, allegedly wearing a lead weightlifter's belt. Director Aldrich noted there was a way of making it easy on the actor who was doing the carrying, but Crawford wanted Bette to suffer. Despite the behind-the-scenes turmoil, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was a massive success. Produced on a modest budget, it grossed $9 million at the box office, making it the 14th highest-grossing film of the year. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, with Davis receiving her 10th and final nomination for Best Actress. Crawford notably was not nominated. In a move that many saw as very calculated, Crawford offered to accept the Best Actress Oscar on behalf of Anne Bancroft, who was unable to attend. When Bancroft won, Crawford took the stage, leaving Davis fuming in the audience. Crawford later commented on the incident, saying, "She acted like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was a one-woman show after they nominated her. What was I supposed to do? Let her hog all the glory, act like I hadn't even been in the movie?" Apparently, surviving one movie together wasn't enough, because somehow they signed on to do it all again. A couple years later, Bette and Joan signed on to co-star in Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, a southern gothic thriller that felt like the spiritual sequel to Baby Jane. But let's just say it didn't go well. Bette still hadn't forgiven Joan for the Oscar stunt, or other moments from their past. From day one on the set, the atmosphere was toxic. Bette was allegedly more icy and combative than before. Crawford, never one to be bullied, lasted just a few days before suddenly falling ill. Production stalled while she was supposedly recovering, but after weeks of delays, Joan bowed out completely and never came back. She was replaced by Olivia de Havilland, and that was the last time the two legends ever attempted to work together. They never shared a set or a conversation again. The legendary feud between Bette and Joan has been immortalized in Hollywood lore, often portrayed as a relentless battle of egos. However, a closer examination reveals a more intricate narrative, shaped by personal ambitions, professional rivalries, and the industry's penchant for dramatization. Bette Davis was never one to mince words, and her candid remarks about fellow actors were well known. For instance, when asked about the most unprofessional person she had worked with, Davis did not name Crawford, but pointed to Faye Dunaway, describing her as totally impossible and uncooperative during their collaboration on the disappearance of Amy in 1976. This distinction suggests that despite their differences, Davis recognized Crawford's professionalism. Joan Crawford, in contrast, often chose silence over public rebutals. She rarely responded to Davis's barbs, maintaining a composed exterior. In a rare instance, during a 1971 Life magazine interview, Crawford remarked, "I'm the quiet one and Bette's explosive. I have discipline, she doesn't." Despite their public spats, both actresses acknowledged each other's talents. Davis once admitted, "No actresses on earth are as different as we are, all the way down the line," highlighting their contrasting approaches to their craft. Crawford, too, recognized Davis's prowess, albeit with a competitive edge. In their respective memoirs, the feud occupies surprisingly little space. Davis's This and That and Crawford's A Portrait of Joan focuses more on their professional journeys and professional achievements than on their rivalry. This omission suggests that while the feud was real, it didn't define their lives as much as the media portrayed. In reality, the press didn't just report on the feud. They poured gasoline on it. As early as 1935, Picture Play magazine teased readers with headlines like "Bette Davis and Joan Crawford, Hollywood's hottest feud." Decades later, during the release of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the New York Times couldn't resist commenting that the actresses' off-screen animosity adds an extra layer of tension to their already explosive performances. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper were practically on the payroll to add fuel to the flames. And the obsession didn't end with the headlines. Over the years, the rivalry was revisited and rehashed in tell-all books, biographies, and of course, Feud, Bette and Joan, the hit FX series that brought their drama to a whole new generation. Even decades later, Hollywood still couldn't let go of the drama. So, was the feud real? Oh, absolutely. But was it also hyped up by studios, the press, and a public that loved to watch two powerful women go at it? You bet. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford were more than just rivals. They were icons, survivors, and complicated as hell. Their beef was real, but it was also theatrical, strategic, and at times kind of fabulous. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Whose side are you on? Team Bette or Team Joan or team they both deserved better from Hollywood? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into old Hollywood nostalgia.